The Demigods of Elden Ring. 12-ish of the most important characters in the game, yet their stories are obscured in texts across the lands between. How much of it is actually important, and what do you need to know for the DLC? Well, today we'll be briefly explaining each of the demigods so you at least have an idea of what's going on when you boot up the game for the first time in a year this weekend. This video is focused solely on the demigods, so we will not be delving into any of those related to the demigods like Godfrey or Ranni, with two exceptions. Marika and Radagon, as they are the parents of the demigods, and I think it's important to have some understanding of them to better understand the demigods. So let's briefly go over both of them. Marika, an outsider to the lands between, was one day chosen to be a god. Elected as an Empyrean, Marika was chosen as one of the few people that could succeed the current god to beckon in the new age. And that's exactly what she did, creating a golden age and a golden order to govern that age. She envisioned an age free from death, and as such, one of her first actions was to pluck the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring and give it to her shadow half-brother Malekith to guard. She would then take a consort in the warrior Hoarah, known for his strength and ruthlessness. However, this name and title was not fit for a ruler, so Hoarah took the name of Godfrey and became the first Elden Lord. Together, they would conquer the majority of the lands between and have three children, Godwyn the Golden and the Omen twins Morgott and Mohg. However, their partnership would not last forever, as after defeating his final foe, Godwyn's eyes would lose their sheen and he would be robbed of the grace of gold. He was told to roam the Badlands outside the lands between and to die over and over again until his grace was returned to him. Marika would then take her second consort in Radagon, stealing him away from Ranni and their children Ranni, Rykard, and Radahn. With the partnership between Radagon and Marika, these three would be elevated to demigod status. Radagon and Marika would have at least two children together, Malenia and Miquella, but these two would be born afflicted because Marika and Radagon were indeed one person. Sometime later, a piece of the Rune of Death was stolen, and it was given to the Black Knife Assassins to carry out the Night of Black Knives, where they would assassinate Godwyn the Golden. This assassination would drive Marika to the brink of sanity, and she would ultimately shatter the Elden Ring with her hammer. This would obviously not sit well with the Greater Will or the Elden Beast, and as such she was imprisoned in the Erdtree and essentially crucified on a rune arc. The shattering would lead to great runes becoming available to the demigods, and it would also return grace to the Tarnished, such as Godfrey and our Tarnished. And now we can get into the demigods. The first demigod we must talk about is the firstborn, Godwyn the Golden. Born to Marika and Godfrey, Godwyn the Golden was beloved by many and seen as a hero by just as many. He is credited with playing a major role in repelling the ancient dragons from Leyndell by defeating Fortisex in battle and then befriending the dragon. This actually led to the ancient dragon cult being founded in Leyndell, which would create the Dragonic Tree Sentinels and others. However, Godwyn was not beloved by all. As the poster child of the Golden Order, Godwyn drew the ire of those who opposed the Order and the Erdtree itself. One of these individuals was his half-sister Ranni, who we will be talking about in a little bit. Ranni would orchestrate the assassination of Godwyn using the Black Knife Assassins with blades imbued with the Rune of Death. This would of course result in Godwyn's death, but he wouldn't truly die. At the same time of Godwyn's assassination, Ranni killed herself, leading to both suffering a half-death, with Godwyn's soul dying and Ranni's body dying. Godwyn's body was buried in the roots of the Erdtree, and an issue soon became apparent. With no soul, Godwyn's body was unable to die a true death, causing the death within him to fester and produce Deathblight. This disfigured Godwyn's body beyond all recognition, and soon Deathblight began to spread through the lands between. Godwyn's death was also a major catalyst for the Shattering. After Godwyn, Marika and Godfrey would have a set of twins, Morgott and Mohg. But these twins had an ill-fated birth, as both were born as omens, which are creatures covered in twisting horns that are outright rejected by the Erdtree. Most omen have their horns cut off and are thrown out of Leyndell, but those of noble descent get a much nicer fate, being imprisoned to the sewers below Leyndell for their entire life. This rejection by the Erdtree sat differently for the two twins. Morgott wanted to prove himself to the tree and swore fealty despite its rejection. He would prove his loyalty by sealing his cursed blood in a blade which would sit hidden within the wooden staff he carried. Beyond that, he doesn't do much until the Shattering, where, like all the other demigods, he would claim a great rune from the Elden Ring before claiming the throne of Leyndell. This was not done out of selfishness, but instead so he could protect the Erdtree. Even after it rejected him, he protected the Erdtree from all attackers, including his fellow demigods such as Radahn. At some point, and for some reason, he took on the moniker of Morgott the Fell, and used that name to rule the capital city and lead the Knights Cavalry. Morgott's loyalty to the Erdtree is by far his most notable attribute. Even during the story and up until his death, he swears its protection, finally attaining the validation he sought from it upon his death. Mohg, on the other hand, said nah, fuck that shit, and found a different god to commune with deep in the subterranean shunning grounds, the Formless Mother, who essentially set Mohg's accursed blood on fire, allowing him to use blood flame magic. During the Shattering, Mohg escaped the subterranean shunning grounds to claim a great rune and assumed the title of Lord of Blood. Around the same time, he developed the Mohgwyn's Palace underground and started to recruit for his own army. All of this was part of an attempt to take the throne and become the Elden Lord, but he was still missing one piece: a consort. See, Mohg himself was not an Empyrean, meaning he was not fit for godhood and could not become Elden Lord without an Empyrean consort. After a Shattering, there was a number of options, but one was far more vulnerable than the rest: Miquella. So Mohg traveled to the Halig Tree to pluck his infantine brother from his cocoon, in the hopes of feeding his half-brother his own blood to grow him into a god. Mohg would also employ a band of Tarnished known as the Bloody Fingers. We see them as the NPCs that can be encountered during Yura's questline. There's also this other Mohg, but I don't know exactly what that's about, so let's just move on to our next set of demigods, Radagon and Renala's children. As I already stated, we're not going to be going over Renala in this video because she is not a demigod, but all three of her children, Ranni, Radahn, and Rykard, are. Let's get started with the most important one, Ranni. We have a lot going on here because she has a ton of lore and also a lot of in-game story as well. Ranni was born as the youngest child to Radagon and Renala. Born as an Empyrean, she had the potential to become the next ruler of the lands between after Marika. She was even chosen by the Two Fingers as a potential successor, and was gifted a shadow in the form of Blyed, who was raised as a foster brother to Ranni. The two grew up playing together, growing close while under the watch of Iji the blacksmith. At some point, she was led by Renala to find her dark moon, and later found a snowy crone in the woods that we know as the Snow Witch. This witch would go on to become her mentor in secret and taught Ranni a lot about cold sorceries which worked well with her dark moon. Later on, Radagon would leave Renala to return to Marika, becoming Elden Lord. This would catapult Ranni and her siblings to the status of demigods, whilst also greatly hurting Renala, causing her to kind of go insane. Ranni was not happy about being a demigod, nor did she like her Empyrean blood, as she did not wish to become a puppet for the greater will. She wished to escape her fate. So one day she stole a piece of destined death from Malekith and imbued the rune into the blades of the Black Knife assassins. On the night of Black Knives, Godwyn the Golden was assassinated, and Ranni took her own life simultaneously. For Godwyn, this meant the death of his soul, and for Ranni, it meant the death of her body, allowing her soul to remain in the lands between and find a new home in a doll inspired by the Snowy Crone. Some fans theorized that part of why Ranni turned away from the Golden Order was the separation of Radagon and Renala, as she appeared to be quite close with her mother, and the separation basically destroyed the woman she knew. And while this would make a lot of sense, I had a hard time finding actual evidence of this. So if I'm missing something here, please let me know in the comments down below. Anyway, Godwyn's death was a major trigger of the Shattering, and despite orchestrating the assassination, Ranni remained pretty much absent from the conflict. Some of her forces worked to remove the influence of the Greater Will from the lands between, but besides that, she mostly chilled, until the Tarnished arrived, aka us. She first chose herself to give us the Spirit Calling Bell as well as a Spirit Ash, but if the Tarnished journeys up to Caria Manor, we can enlist to serve Ranni in her quest to free the lands between from the Greater Will. She needs us to find the Fingerslayer blade in Nokron, as she must kill her own two fingers to free herself from the Greater Will. She then journeys to Noxtella, where she once again enlists our help in order to kill the shadows sent by her two fingers. One of these is Blyed. Upon slaying these beasts, she gives us a key to a chest in Rhea Lucaria, which is where a ring lays. This ring is so that we may become her consort. If we choose to become her consort, we will find Ranni beneath the Moonlight Altar, where she is covered in the blood of her own two fingers. If we put the ring on Ranni's finger, we will officially become her consort, and she will tell us of the Age of Stars she wishes to start. It is an age guided by the wisdom of the moon, a chill night that encompasses all. It is an age of fear, doubt, and loneliness that will seem to last forever. Despite how dark this ending sounds, it is actually one of the better ones. Ranni's intentions with the Age of Stars are likely twofold. The first is obviously to free the lands between and all who live there from influence in general, giving all living beings the ability to choose their own future and path. The second fold is to strengthen those in the lands between so that when the Age of Stars does end, they will be independent and strong enough to survive and thrive survive on their own. Hard times make strong men, and Ranni is essentially forcing a change to hard times in this ending, while giving those strong enough to prevail the opportunity for individualism and success. Honestly, even in this explanation of her ending, I glossed over a lot. So if you want to know about Ranni or her ending, I suggest checking out some of these videos as they are all great works on the subject. But for now, we need to move on to Rykard. Rykard is a lot more simple, almost as simple as subscribing to this channel. If you've made it this far into the video, you obviously like my content, and if this video does well, there's going to be a lot more Elden Ring content on the way. So you should subscribe if you want to stay up to date for future videos, or if you just want to support me. It's one of the best ways to support a channel, you know? Also, if you're interested in seeing me play Elden Ring, I'm going to be playing it pretty much all weekend and next week. That's going to be over on my Twitch, so be sure to check that out as well. Anyway, Rykard is not too unlike Ranni. He too abandoned the Erd Tree, but not until after the Shattering. See, prior to the event, Rykard was a vicious Justicar in favor of the Golden Order. He commanded a company of Inquisitors who persecuted and tortured anyone that was considered heretical by the Golden Order. This Inquisition was centered on Mount Gelmir, as that is where he spent most of his time, and it was also where he found the magma magic from a time long lost, which he brought back into practice. Rykard was also known for creating the Iron Virgins. And no, I'm not talking about Iron Valorant players, I'm talking about these annoying ass enemies. What's interesting about Rykard is that it appears that he did develop some sort of beef with the Golden Order prior to the Shattering, as he did aid Ranni in orchestrating the Night of Black Knives and got a piece of the Rune of Death as thanks. After the Shattering, Rykard launched his blasphemous campaign against the Erd Tree and the Greater Will. He took land and gained power by force, which many viewed as justified, drawing many followers in the process who saw his actions as heroic. This would result in a war against Leyndell that would turn into a disgusting, undying war, leading to many of the soldiers becoming cannibals out of desperation and insanity. By far the most notable thing about Rykard though was him feeding himself to the Great Serpent which lay below Volcano Manor. This serpent is an old enemy of the Erd Tree and convinced Rykard that together they could conquer the tree. This is of course not what happened, as after being eaten he started to degrade, leading to hedonistic depravity as he fed on his own champions and became far more blasphemous than he was before. This would be a post-nut clarity level of turnoff for those who once called Rykard master, and his forces ultimately abandoned him, one even leaving the Serpent Hunter behind, a weapon that was supposed to be able to slay the ancient snake, allowing someone from the future to slay Rykard. And though many would try, none would be able to slay the beast until us, if you decide to fight him in your playthrough. And the final demigod of this set is Radahn. Radahn was the eldest of the demigods produced by Radagon and Rennala, and he was born with heroic aspirations. Even from his youth, he was inspired and awed by Godfrey, and in an attempt to emulate the first Elden Lord, Radahn fashioned his armor after lions as they were the symbol of Godfrey. Despite cherishing strength, Radahn still had a soft side. As he continued to grow, he did not want to abandon his tiny beloved horse Leonard, so he studied and mastered gravitational magic in Celia, allowing him to continue to ride the horse even at his enormous size. This act would also aid Celia later on, as Radahn would use gravitational magic to stop the stars themselves, which would have crashed into Celia town, destroying it. This feat earned him the moniker of Star Scourge. Radahn also developed his own army known as the Redmanes, and they were known to be among the strongest knights in the lands between, having no weakness. After the Shattering, Radahn would play a major part in the wars that occurred throughout the lands between, using the armies to challenge the other demigods. He would find mixed success in his endeavors, as he would be forced out of Leyndell by Morgott and his army, as we see in the opening cinematic. However, Radahn's biggest loss would come in the form of his stalemate with Malenia, where Malenia was forced to let the Scarlet Aeonia bloom in order to assure she was not defeated. This bloom caused scarlet rot to ravage not only Radahn, but Caelid as a whole. While Radahn's body stayed strong, his mind would not, and he would eventually devolve into little more than an animal scavenging the deserts of Caelid, feasting on his own soldiers and anyone that attempted to challenge him, all while still riding his tiny little horse and holding back the stars. The Festival of Radahn was pulled together by mighty warriors who wished to see the demigod put out of his misery and to give him an honorable death. And now we come to the final group of demigods, those born from Radagon and Marika. Radagon and Marika had at least two children together, Malenia and Miquella, who were born as twins. These two were born as Empyreans, but they were were not in good health, as Marika and Radahn were the same person, so it was basically like god incest. As such, both twins were born afflicted. Malenia was born afflicted with the Scarlet Rot, a flesh-devouring disease-like affliction that eats away at its victims from the inside out. It cannot be stopped by anything except unalloyed gold, and since unalloyed gold didn't exist at this point, the rot took multiple limbs from Malenia as well as her eyesight. At some point, Malenia encountered a blind swordsman who would become her master and trade Malenia in the way of the blade, allowing her to grow to near peerless strength and teaching her the waterfowl dance that we all know and love so much. Her strength would gain her an army in the Cleanrot Knights, as well as worshippers that saw her as a god. Because of their shared struggles, her and Miquella became quite close. She would swear to become his blade and protect his feeble body while he worked tirelessly to find a cure for the Scarlet Rot. While Miquella was not able to find an outright cure, he did develop unalloyed gold, which prevented the spread of the rot. He fashioned the gold into prosthesis for Malenia, as well as a needle which warded away the meddling of the outer gods. But we'll talk more in depth about Miquella in a little bit. After the Shattering, Malenia would lead an army south from the Halig Tree. During this campaign, she won many battles, including one against Godric the Grafted, where he got absolutely humiliated and had to grovel at her feet for the chance to live. She would later fight Radahn, and in order to force a stalemate, the Scarlet Aeonia would bloom, as we already stated. But the blooming of this flower did not only affect Radahn, it also left Malenia in a coma, and one of her Cleanrot Knights, Finlay, had to carry her all the way back to the Halig Tree, where she was to await Miquella's return as she slumbered. During her deep sleep, the rot within her would seep out, poisoning the Halig Tree, and Miquella would be taken from the tree by Mohg, and that's where the Tarnished finds her. But there's still one question that remains unanswered for Malenia. What caused the second bloom of the Scarlet Aeonia? We know she had to bloom 3 times to become the Goddess of Rot. One happened in Caelid and one happened in our fight, but the other one, which is just here, seems to be unexplained. Personally, I think the Kindred of Rot had some involvement in it, as they wanted to see the realization of the Goddess of Rot, but I don't think that has been confirmed yet. And now we come to potentially the most important demigod besides maybe Ranni, Miquella. Miquella was born with the affliction of eternal youth, but not the cool type of eternal youth, the kind where he was stuck as a child. Early into his life, he adhered to the fundamental principles of the Golden Order, but that would change over time, as Miquella found he was not able to treat Malenia's rot while following the Order. After parting from the Order, he developed unalloyed gold to prevent the meddling of the outer gods, which in turn prevented the rot from continuing within Malenia while still not curing it. He also tried to find a cure for Godwyn's half-death, and while he was not successful in this endeavor, it shows that Miquella was still on good terms with his family despite leaving the Order. In fact, if there's one thing that was attributed to Miquella besides his intelligence, it was his kindness. Known as Miquella the Kind, he garnered support and love by many, and there seems to be some theorization that this is actually an ability to charm people, which might be important to the DLC, but more on that later. At some point, Miquella created the Halig Tree, an alternative to the Erd Tree that would turn away no one. He fed the tree with his own blood, and it grew mighty and tall over the fortress of Elphael. But this tree had more than just one purpose. It was also supposed to allow Miquella to take on his true form, freeing him from his affliction. This, of course, never came to be, for as Miquella rested in the tree, Mohg ripped him out of it to take Miquella for himself as a consort. This would ultimately lead to the deterioration of the Halig Tree, which was exacerbated by Malenia's rot. Once stolen by Mohg, Miquella never interacted with his demigod half-brother. This is because he was never truly there. He abandoned everything. His golden flesh,
his blinding strength,
even his fate, which likely means his candidacy for godhood. He abandoned everything and left for the Land of Shadows, which is where the DLC takes place. It appears that Miquella is going to be very important to the DLC, as he has been the main focus of both DLC trailers, along with the Tarnished and Messmer, who is probably a demigod, but we're not 100% sure. Kind of like Melina, so I do want to briefly talk about both of them as well, just to cover my bases. Messmer is the demigod we know the least about. He obviously calls the Land of Shadows home, which is why we've never seen or heard of him so far, but beyond that we just don't know much. He has the red hair of an Empyrean and seems to rule the Land of Shadows with his flame. It's very likely that he is a major antagonist of the DLC, if not the big bad guy. We know he waged war on groups of soldiers in the Land of Shadows, and we know he looks at us and sees us as not worthy of lordship, but that's kind of it right now. We technically don't even know who his parents truly are. Many people believe that he is the child of Radagon and Marika, which would make decent sense as it would fill out the butterfly theory, but it's still possible that he is a child of Marika and someone else, or Radagon and someone else, or the child of a different demigod like Rykard. We just don't know yet because he is a brand new character introduced into the DLC, which brings us to our next maybe demigod, Melina. Not much is known about Melina, but we do know she was born at the foot of the Erd Tree, and she describes her mother as being in the Erd Tree, which highly insinuates her mother to be Marika, although this is never outright stated. Her file name is also Daughter Marika, which seems pretty damning, but this falls outside actual lore, so it might just be some kind of leftover label. If Marika is her mother, this would make her a demigod, as she is a child of a god. At some point, her body was burned, and she became the spirit we all know. This is where the story of Elden Ring begins. At this point, Melina has no idea what purpose she was born for, and will travel with us so we can escort her to the royal capital. She is the one that allows us to use ruins, and gives us Torrent as well. Upon reaching Leyndell and defeating Morgott, Melina discovers her true purpose is to set fire to the Erd Tree with the flames of ruin. She doesn't know if this is the purpose her mother gave her or not, and as such she's acting on her own volition. After acquiring the flames of ruin, she sets the Erd Tree ablaze. This is implied to kill her, as we don't see her again after this point, unless we choose a different flame, the Frenzied Flame, in which case she said she will hunt us down until the day we die. I do have one far-fetched theory about Melina and Messmer that I would like to share before we wrap up. There is absolutely no evidence for this of anyway, and it's just something I've kind of theorized on my own, but I kind of think Melina and Messmer are two sides of the same person. Think about it. If Marika can be the same person as Radagon, why can't anyone else? Especially two of their children. The main evidence though is the smoldering butterfly, as it holds very important symbolism for both characters, with Melina being important to burning the Erd Tree and Messmer using flames in combat in the Land of Shadows. It also appears that they both have their right eyes sealed away, and the only time we see Melina's right eye open is during the Frenzied Flame ending. It's also kind of surprising that Melina is the only person that can survive the Frenzied Flame, and when we enter the Erd Tree we see Marika impaled by a spear, which is the weapon Messmer uses, which implies that he can move freely in the same area that Melina can. But this is definitely a stretch. Anyway, that's all the demigods. Wait, what's that sound? Oh, Godric. Yeah, I had no idea where to put this guy, so let's just put him right here. Godric is the last descendant of the Golden lineage, meaning he is the farthest person from Marika that is still considered a demigod, and to even consider him a demigod is a bit of a stretch. He is a complete loser. Unlike the other demigods who developed armies out of strength and impressive feats, Godric's army is made up of soldiers who were fleeing Leyndell along with him. Unlike the other demigods who built their own castles and strongholds, Godric moved into Stormveil, which was empty at the time that he arrived, and it was not used to grow his own army, but to hide from Radahn and to graft. His most notable moment in the entire lore is groveling at Malenia's feet, which, like, I get. If I could get that close to them, I would too, but for a demigod, it's just so lame. And with that, we're finally actually done with the demigods. If you watched all the way to the end, thank you so much for watching. It really does mean a lot to me. Please be sure to subscribe and check out my Twitch as well if you enjoy Elden Ring content. Thank you so much again, and I'll see you again in 2 days for a regularly scheduled video.